YouTube, what's going on? It's Tysophone. I just wanted to come on here real quick and give you guys my thoughts on the new Final Fantasy 16 gameplay footage that Square decided to gift us the other day. So first off, if you already see my last video I made on Final Fantasy 16, you would know that I feel like this game, at least gameplay wise, will play just like Devil May Cry, which is to be expected since the combat is directed by Ryota Suzuki himself. Not something that I'm really all too excited about, considering that it kind of forces developers to center the gameplay around one controllable character, which is Clive, but I digress. So the first thing that I noticed was Clive shooting projectiles from his hands, and projectiles pretty much came out the same element as whatever icon that he had selected, and the amount of times that you can use it seemed pretty unlimited, kind of like Dante and Nero shooting with their guns, and it could also be charged up too, which is also similar to how Dante and Nero's guns work in Devil May Cry. It might feel better to hit enemies with Clive when playing the actual game, but watching him do it, it didn't really do anything for me because it didn't look satisfying to do. The sound effects when you hit the enemy sounded really satisfying, but there's just something about seeing him wail on a staggered enemy that didn't feel all that great for me. Clive just kind of looked stiff, and his moves didn't look like they hurt all that much, especially on bigger bosses, that's for sure. Now this could be because Final Fantasy 16 is trying to take more of a realistic approach when it comes to combat, and not trying to go like that whole soldier swinging around his giant oversized sword route like how they went with Final Fantasy 7 Remake. Now where the combat really shines for me is when he uses his icon abilities to hit someone. All those really seem like they had like some sort of weight to them, and when they connected with the enemy, and the abilities all look vibrant and flashy, and from the looks of it you can kind of change the icons on the fly and access different elements necessary for whatever battle you're in. And it also looked like Clive's fighting style changes depending on which icon you have equipped at that moment. I also saw that this game has an evasion system as well. On the right side of the screen it said precision dodge, which seems to pop up every time Clive does a successful well-timed dodge, and I'm not entirely sure if you get perks for doing that. It's nice to know that the game acknowledges your mechanical skill. Another thing that I thought was interesting was that Clive travels with a companion named Torgal, who I'm tempted to call Rapide from Tales of Vesperia. If you know, you know. And he has his own commands at the bottom left side of the screen. And when I saw this, I was like, okay, Square seems to be taking inspiration from God of War, because in God of War they do the same thing. They have a buddy system in that game, which works how it works in this game, where Atreus can be controllable by the player and you can kind of give him commands to do while you're fighting around with Kratos. I would say this and the icons are probably the features we know about that look the most interesting, because mostly we're going to be occupied trying to manage which icons to use when, and when to use Torgal's ability to aid you during the fight and to set you up for different scenarios. And those two mechanics pretty much bring some type of depth to the combat, and it kind of reminded me of V from DMC5, where you kind of have to control all three of his familiars in battle, and changing the icons back and forth is almost like Dante from DMC, where you have to change his styles to suit the situation that he's in. As for the huge icon battles, that's a huge no for me. I don't really care about running around with large beings, you know, hitting each other and stuff like that. Usually fights like these always end up playing out the same every time. You know, you just kind of dodge a couple of attacks, run forward, look for an opening, attack, rinse and repeat. So I'm really interested on how Square is going to really make these battles, you know, interesting, because they look cool, but at the same time they don't really have me at the edge of my seat at all. And another thing that Square brought back was quick time events to help the player kind of feel immersed in the combat. I'm not mad at this at all. Personally, I love quick time events back in games like Final Fantasy 13-2. And I always thought they were kind of cool to look at, and they always kind of got me hyped up for a boss fight and stuff like that. So I'm happy to see those make its way back to the series with 16. But at the same time, I don't think it's necessary either, because I'm also okay with just sitting there and watching the battles play out in kind of like a cinematic kind of way, instead of having to press buttons while cool shit's going on the screen. So I'm 50-50 on the quick time events. It looks cool, but it's not a necessity. Yeah, so to basically sum up how I felt after seeing the footage, is that the combat is going to be flashy, and it's going to have some elements in it that require you to be strategic about how you approach battles and how you approach certain enemies. The combat doesn't look too fast, but not too slow either. Hitting the enemy didn't look like it felt all that satisfying to do, and Clive just kind of looks really stiff with some of his movements. This doesn't help considering that he's the only character that you have to play with throughout the game, so I'm afraid it might get old too fast, but I trust that Square will flesh out his moveset so much that he will never feel boring to play as, and he'll like have a lot of diversity to him. And yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all my thoughts on the new Final Fantasy 16 gameplay footage, and it looks like we'll get our hands on the game for ourselves in a couple of weeks before the launch in the form of a demo. And who knows, maybe I'll eat my words. Maybe Final Fantasy 16 will be the greatest entry in the entire series. Well, second greatest after Final Fantasy X, which we all know is the best one in the franchise. But yeah, if you liked the video, hit the like button. If you want to keep up with more Final Fantasy news and topics, hit the subscribe button. This has been Ty Savon, and I'm out, people. Later.